The Groundhog by Richard Eberhart. In June, amid the golden fields, I saw a groundhog lying dead. Dead lay he, my senses shook, and mind outshot our naked frailty. There, lowly in the vigorous summer, his form began its senseless change, and made my senses waver dim. Seeing nature ferocious in him, inspecting close his maggots might, and seeing cauldron of his being, half with loathing, half with strange love, I poked him with an angry stick. The fever arose, became a flame, and vigor circumscribed the skies. Immense energy in the sun, and through my frame a senseless trembling. My stick had done nor good, no harm. Then stood I, silent in the day, watching the object as before, and kept my reverence for knowledge, trying for control, to be still, to quell the passion of the blood, until I bent down on my knees, praying for joy in the sight of decay.
And so I left and I returned, in autumn strict of eye to see the sap gone out of the groundhog, but the bony sudden hulk remained, but the year had lost its meaning, and in intellectual chains I lost both love and loathing. Moored up in a wall of wisdom, another summer took the fields again, massive and burning, full of life, but when I chanced upon the spot, there was only little hair left, and the bones bleaching in the sunlight, beautiful as architecture, I watched them like a geometer, and cut a walking stick from a birch. It had been 3 years now. There was no sign of the groundhog. I stood there in a whirling summer, my hand capped a withered heart, and thought of China and of Greece, of Alexander in his tent, of Montague in his tower, and of Saint Teresa in her wild lament. The Groundhog begins with portraying a picture of a golden field compared to a lying dead animal, which is a major contrast between beautiful scenes which are established in the golden fields and dead animals, which would be the groundhog. In June represents life, but more importantly, it is going to represent kind of a contrast to the idea of death as well, because it's life and then it's like a long life because of the long days. He uses contrast throughout the poem. You can see another one here have loathing and love. Love and loathing are a contradiction, and he uses these contradictions to show that the constant change or switch, so for the contradictions it'd be going from one end to the other, like spectrum, and in nature things go kind of quickly, they change back and forth, so that is why he includes these contradictions. The next major thing is senseless change. That is going to be your kind of senseless, meaning there's not a true process, an irrational process, but it's ordered. And decay looks like there's not a specific order, but there is in fact an order of nature, which he understands a little later in the poem. Seeing nature ferocious in him is the groundhog, and ferocious nature is going to be maggots eating away his insides. Half with loathing, half with strange love. This is a contradiction. He is repulsed by the sight of maggots, but is impressed by the order and amount of energy maggots invest in the dead body. Next is an angry stick. An angry stick is personifying a stick, and it's going to represent almost an extension of his arm. The stick is going to be an extension of his arm, thus the anger is going to be representing his own anger of the shock of the fact that, well, death happens. Next, you're going to have illustrations of nature. You're going to have words such as immense or circumscribed. These are showing kind of the immense power of, or immense might be a repetitive word there, but just the vast power that nature has, including the power of death. Here we have, my stick had done nor good nor harm. And then, so he's saying no matter what he does, death is not going to change because he is sticking the groundhog with it. It's out of his control. And then he's saying, so he's kind of lost here on what to do, but he kept his reverence of knowledge. So he kind of grounded himself, which is where to be still, to ground himself. And he's saying he remembers the purpose of decay is to break down old life, and that creates nutrients to rebuild new life. So it's kind of more of a cycle than what he originally says up here is just death, an end of an era. On the next page it begins with praying for joy in the sight of decay. Praying is commonly used to show a spiritual perspective. So he's saying, and decay is going to be, yes, there was death, and many people associate the aspect of death with, in the Christian faith, it'd be going to heaven, but throughout different faiths, different afterlives. Further down, you have another visit begins. So this was the first visit. It was his initial encounter, and he left without joy. He was still upset by the matter. But when autumn came, you can see the progression of decay. The sap was gone out of the groundhog, so that's almost phase 2 of decay. The bony sun's hulk remained, and he's just saying the year had lost its meaning. He was still lost in what to do. This is a reference to the love and the loathing, another contradiction from here when he said half with loathing, half with strange love. So he's still unsure what to think about this process of death. He's trying to look at it through a scientific perspective, but that's not working. He's looking at it through wisdom. He's trying to add everything, and this concludes his second visit. And again, he was very lost. This third visit begins in the summer, so you're going from autumn to summer. He took the fields again, full of life. So although the topic of this poem is about death, he's saying through this second summer, so it has been a year since his initial encounter, because of June right there, he is saying that cycle of life is beginning again in this new summer, and some of that life began due to the death in the past summer. When he got to the spot where the groundhog was, he kind of came to a more peaceful setting where he describes the bones bleaching in the sunlight, so the almost purification of color, the purification of his bones, make them look like architecture. He uses the word beautiful, and that is very important. That is kind of a turning point in this poem, because it shows he's understanding the beauty of the process instead of the mere fact that death is the end of a cycle. Watch them like a geometer. This is a simile to explain how intensely he is watching it, so he's fascinated, he's invested in this issue. And this is a very small comparison, but I found it to be important. Here he says a walking stick, which is not a personification, not to be confused, but this said an angry stick. So it shows walking is usually not a very aggressive activity. A walking stick is kind of going in the opposite direction of an angry stick. So that shows the progression in sticks. And then, so that concludes the third section. And the last section is right here. And that is when the cycle ends. There's no sign of the groundhog. It is fully decayed. He is in the summer still, but it is 3 years later from his initial encounter, and he's kept with a withered heart, showing, again, he's saying, so he was confused in the beginning, he was upset about it, he was trying to find a path. Third, he found a path, and now that the groundhog's decaying process is gone, he is again mourning the loss of that. He does use a metaphor of China and Greece. China would be portraying a groundhog, as well as Greece portraying the groundhog. They were both ancient civilizations that had once flourished but have now collapsed. Collapsed is in a different context, saying dead. Alexander in his tent, so now he's saying this is how he felt, or this is how he thought. Alexander in his tent, he was trying to conquer the idea. In the tower, he was writing. Saint Teresa in her wild lament, and lament means mourning. So he goes from this lying dead, he's mourning the fact of the groundhog. He kind of makes a cycle, but by the end, he's back to mourning, and 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So those are the annotations of the poem, and a little bit of an explanation.